I'm Emily Wirtz, 28, a vintage doll restoration specialist. I run a small but respected business from my downtown studio apartment. With delicate hands made for intricate work and observant green eyes, I carry myself with a quiet confidence that most people mistake for shyness. The mahogany conference table felt cold against my palms as I pressed them flat, trying to steady the tremor that had started the moment I walked into Hartwell and Associates. The scent of old leather and expensive cologne hung heavy in the air, mixing with something else, the metallic taste of grief that seemed to coat everything since Dad's funeral 3 days ago. "Emily's sweetheart, you look pale," my brother Marcus said from across the table, his voice dripping with false concern. At 32, he'd perfected the art of sounding caring, while his eyes calculated profit margins. "Maybe you should have stayed home. This business talk might be too much for you right now." I watched him adjust his Armani tie, the one he'd bought specifically for today, I was sure, and felt that familiar knot form in my stomach. The same knot I'd carried since childhood, whenever Marcus decided to remind everyone in the room that I was just his little sister who played with dolls. "I'm fine," I whispered, though my voice came out smaller than I intended. The lawyer, Mr. Hartwell, shuffled through papers at the head of the table. He was older than I remembered from Dad's business dinners, his silver hair now completely white, his movements deliberate and careful. The sound of rustling documents filled the silence, like autumn leaves scraping across pavement. "Before we begin," Marcus announced, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of someone who'd already won, "I want everyone to know how grateful I am that Dad finally saw sense about the family business." He gestured broadly, his wedding ring catching the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Wirtz Construction has been in our family for 40 years. It needs someone who understands the industry, someone who can make the tough decisions." My Aunt Linda nodded from her seat near the window, though I caught her glancing at me with something that might have been sympathy. Uncle Robert just stared at his hands. They'd both worked for Dad at various points, both knew the business inside and out, but neither had ever challenged Marcus's assumption that he was the heir apparent. "Marcus," I started, but he held up a hand. I know this is hard. Losing Dad, feeling left out of the business side of things. But you've got your little doll shop, right? That's perfect for you. Delicate work, artistic, quiet. Much better suited to your temperament." The condescension in his voice made my teeth clench. My little doll shop had restored museum pieces, had clients who flew in from 3 states away, had been featured in Antique Collectors Weekly just last month. But to Marcus, it would always be playing with toys. Mr. Hartwell cleared his throat, a sound like gravel shifting. "Shall we proceed with the reading?" "Absolutely," Marcus said, straightening his shoulders. "I've already spoken with the foreman about transitioning leadership. The crew respects me, and I've got plans to expand into commercial development. Dad would be proud." I felt something twist in my chest. Not just grief, but something sharper. Dad had never talked about commercial development. He'd loved residential work, loved building homes where families would make memories. He'd always said that houses had souls, and you had to respect that. "The last will and testament of Robert James Wirtz," Mr. Hartwell began, his voice formal and measured. "Written and signed on March 15, 2024.
March.
Just 6 months ago. I remember that day. Dad had seemed distracted during our weekly lunch, kept checking his phone and asking strange questions about my business. I'd thought he was just being supportive, maybe a little bored by my stories about a particularly challenging Victorian-era bisque head I was working on. "To my son, Marcus David Wirtz," the lawyer continued, and I saw Marcus sit up straighter. "I leave my personal effects, including my watch collection, my tools, and my truck." Marcus's smile faltered slightly. "What about the house? The business?" Mr. Hartwell held up a finger, continuing to read. "To my daughter, Emily Rose Wirtz, I leave the family home at 1247 Maple Street, along with all furnishings and personal belongings contained therein." The room went quiet except for the tick of the antique clock on the mantel. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. The house, Dad's house, where I'd grown up, where he taught me to use his tools in the basement workshop, where we'd spent countless evenings working on projects together. Marcus started, then stopped. Okay, that's fine. The house has sentimental value for Emily. But the business. Regarding Wirt's construction, Mr. Hartwell interrupted, and something in his tone made the air in the room feel thinner. This is where things become interesting. Marcus leaned forward, his confidence returning.
Right.
The business comes to me, obviously. I've been working there for 8 years. I know every client, every contract. Emily's never even been on a job site. I wanted to correct him. I'd been on dozens of job sites with Dad when I was younger, had learned to read blueprints before I could properly read books, but something in Mr. Hartwell's expression stopped me. Mr. Wirtz, the lawyer said carefully, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Wirtz Construction was never your father's to leave to anyone. The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus's face went through several expressions, confusion, disbelief, then something approaching panic. What do you mean? Of course it was his business. He built it from nothing. Mr. Hartwell pulled out a different set of documents, these ones looking older, more official. According to the incorporation papers filed in 2019, Wirtz Construction LLC is owned entirely by Emily Rose Wirtz. Your father transferred ownership to her 5 years ago. The room erupted. Marcus shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. That's impossible. Emily doesn't know anything about construction. She's never even. Actually, I said quietly, and everyone turned to look at me. My voice was steadier now, stronger. I do know about construction. Dad taught me everything. I just never told you because you never asked. Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're hooked already, a like and subscribe will keep these stories coming. The truth was, I'd been helping Dad with the business side of things for years. Not the day-to-day operations, Marcus handled that, but the bigger picture. The financial planning, the client relationships, the strategic decisions. Dad had always said I had a better head for business than Marcus, but he'd asked me to keep it quiet. Let your brother feel important, he'd said. He needs that more than you do. I'd thought he meant temporarily. I'd never imagined he was planning this. Marcus was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. You're lying.
Dad would have told me.
We talked about the business all the time. You talked, I corrected. Dad listened. There's a difference. Mr. Hartwell was watching this exchange with the careful attention of someone who'd seen family drama play out in his office many times before. Miss Wirtz, your father left detailed instructions about the transition. He wanted you to have time to decide how you'd like to proceed. You can maintain the current management structure, make changes, or even sell if you prefer.
Sell.
The word hit me like a physical blow. Dad's life work, the business he'd built with his own hands, reduced to a transaction. But as I looked at Marcus, really looked at him, I saw something I'd never noticed before. The way he was gripping the edge of the table, the slight tremor in his hands, the sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the air conditioning. Marcus, I said softly, are you okay? He laughed, but it came out harsh and brittle. Am I okay? Emily, you just stole my inheritance. My future. Everything I've worked for. I didn't steal anything. I didn't even know. Bullshit. The word cracked like a whip. You and Dad, plotting behind my back, making me look like a fool in front of everyone. Aunt Linda shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Marcus, maybe we should all take a breath.
No.
He pointed at me, his fingers shaking. You want to know why Dad really did this? Because you were always his favorite. His precious little girl, who could do no wrong. Well, congratulations, Emily. You got what you wanted. The accusation stung because there was truth in it, but not the way Marcus meant. Dad and I had been close, but it wasn't favoritism, it was understanding. We both saw beauty in broken things, both believed that with enough patience and care, anything could be restored. That's not. I started, but Marcus was already moving toward the door. I need air, he muttered, then paused with his hand on the doorknob. When he turned back, his expression had shifted into something I'd never seen before, cold, calculating, dangerous. You know what, Emily? Enjoy your victory. But don't think this is over. You might own the company on paper, but you don't know the first thing about running it. The crew won't respect you. The clients won't trust you. And when it all falls apart, and it will, don't come crying to me. He slammed the door behind him, leaving the rest of us in stunned silence. Mr. Hartwell cleared his throat again. Perhaps we should continue with the rest of the will? But I wasn't listening anymore. I was thinking about the look in Marcus's eyes just before he left, the way his voice had dropped to something almost threatening. My brother had always been competitive, always needed to win, but this felt different. This felt like war. And as I sat there in that leather-scented conference room, surrounded by the remnants of my father's final wishes, I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus's parting words weren't just angry bluster. They sounded like a promise. The rain started as I pulled into the gravel driveway of Dad's house, my house now, I reminded myself, though the words felt foreign in my mind. Fat droplets splattered against my windshield, each one catching the amber glow of the porch light Dad had always left on. Even in death, his habits lingered. I sat in my car for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, watching water streak down the glass. The house looked exactly the same as it had 3 days ago when I'd come to pick out Dad's funeral clothes. White clapboard siding, green shutters, the wraparound porch where he taught me to whittle when I was 7. But everything felt different now, weighted with secrets and revelations that changed the very foundation of what I thought I knew about my family. The front door key felt heavier than it should have as I turned it in the lock. Inside, the house smelled like Dad's aftershave and the lemon oil he used on his woodworking projects. I flipped on the lights and stood in the entryway, really seeing the space for the first time since becoming its owner. Family photos lined the hallway, Marcus and me at various ages, school pictures and Christmas mornings and summer vacations. But now I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before. In almost every photo where we were working on something together, it was Dad and me. Marcus was usually off to the side, smiling for the camera but not engaged with whatever project was happening. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. We need to talk. Tomorrow, 8 a.m., the construction office. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I stared at the message, trying to decode the tone. Was it a threat? A peace offering? With Marcus, it was impossible to tell. He'd always been good at saying one thing while meaning another, a skill that served him well in business, but made him exhausting as a brother. I wandered into Dad's study, a room I'd always loved but rarely entered without invitation. His desk was exactly as he'd left it, neat stacks of papers, his reading glasses folded beside his coffee mug, a half-finished crossword puzzle from the Sunday paper. But tucked into the corner, almost hidden behind a framed photo of Mom, was a manila folder I'd never seen before. My name was written on the tab in Dad's careful handwriting. Inside, I found documents that made my breath catch. Incorporation papers, yes, but also financial statements, client contracts, and what looked like years of correspondence between Dad and various business partners. As I read, a picture began to emerge that was nothing like the story Marcus had been telling, or the story I believed. Wirtz Construction wasn't just successful, it was thriving. Dad had been quietly expanding, taking on bigger projects, building relationships with developers and architects throughout the region. And according to these documents, he'd been doing it all while deliberately keeping Marcus focused on the day-to-day operations, never letting him see the bigger picture. There was a letter dated just 2 months ago from a development company in the state capital. They wanted to partner with Wirtz Construction on a massive residential project, 200 homes, worth millions in contracts. Dad had been negotiating the deal personally, and according to his notes, he'd been planning to announce it as a surprise. A surprise for me, I realized. Not Marcus. My hands were shaking as I reached the bottom of the folder. There, clipped to the back, was a handwritten note in Dad's familiar scrawl. Emily, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably confused as hell. I know I should have told you sooner, but I wanted to protect you from Marcus's reaction for as long as possible. The truth is, you've been my business partner for years without knowing it. Every major decision, every important contract, every strategic move, I ran it by you first. You just thought we were having casual conversations over lunch. Remember when you suggested we focus more on historic renovations? That became our most profitable division. When you mentioned that young families were looking for energy-efficient homes. That's why we started the Green Building Program. You have instincts for this business that Marcus will never have, because you understand that construction isn't just about building, it's about creating spaces where people can live their best lives. Marcus is a good foreman, but he's not a leader. He sees profit margins where you see possibilities. He thinks in quarters where you think in generations. The business needs someone who can see the forest, not just the trees. I'm sorry to put this burden on you, sweetheart. I know you love your doll restoration work, and I'd never ask you to give that up. But Wirtz Construction is your legacy too, and I trust you to know what to do with it. Love always, Dad. P.S. Check the basement workshop. I left you something. I sat back in Dad's chair, the letter trembling in my hands. All those lunch conversations, all those times he'd asked my opinion about hypothetical business scenarios, he'd been training me without me realizing it. And I'd been giving him advice that had shaped the direction of a multi-million-dollar company. The basement workshop was exactly as Dad had left it, tools hanging in precise order on pegboard walls, workbenches clear and ready for the next project. But in the center of the main workbench, covered by a paint-stained drop cloth, was something that definitely hadn't been there before. I pulled away the cloth and gasped. It was a dollhouse, but not just any dollhouse. This was a perfect replica of our family home, complete down to the green shutters and wraparound porch. Every detail was exact, the front door with its brass knocker, the bay window in the living room, even the small garden shed in the backyard. But as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't just a replica of how the house looked now. It was how the house could look. Dad had added details that didn't exist in reality. A sunroom off the kitchen, a workshop addition behind the garage, a small apartment above what was currently just storage space. Each addition was perfectly crafted, seamlessly integrated into the existing structure. It was a vision of possibility, a blueprint for the future rendered in miniature. Tucked inside the front door of the dollhouse was a tiny envelope, sealed with wax. Inside, in Dad's microscopic handwriting, was another note. This is what I see when I look at our family legacy, not just what it is, but what it could become. The house, the business, the relationships we build. Everything can be expanded, improved, made more beautiful. But it takes vision, patience, and the right hands to do the work. You have those hands, Emily. You always have. I was still staring at the dollhouse when I heard a car door slam outside. Through the basement window, I could see headlights in the driveway, and my stomach dropped as I recognized Marcus's truck. He was supposed to wait until tomorrow. We were supposed to meet at the office on neutral ground, with time for both of us to process what had happened. But here he was at nearly 10 o'clock at night, and something about the way he'd parked, crooked, aggressive, taking up more space than necessary, told me this wasn't going to be the calm conversation I'd been hoping for. I heard the front door open without a knock, heard his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floors above. Emily. His voice echoed through the house, and there was something in it that made my skin prickle. I know you're here. Your car's in the driveway. I climbed the basement stairs slowly, my hand trailing along the banister Dad had installed when I was 12. At the top, I found Marcus standing in the living room, still wearing his suit from the lawyer's office, but with his tie loosened and his hair disheveled. He'd been drinking. I could smell it from across the room. "We need to talk," he said, and his words were just slightly slurred. "Marcus, you're drunk. Maybe we should do this tomorrow."
No.
He stepped closer, and I instinctively backed toward the kitchen. "We're doing this now. I've been thinking about what happened today, and I figured it out." "Figured what out?" His smile was sharp and cold. "Your little game. You and Dad conspiring against me, making me look like an idiot in front of the whole family. It wasn't a conspiracy, Marcus. I didn't even know." "Stop lying." The words exploded out of him, loud enough to make me flinch. "You think I'm stupid? You think I didn't notice all those private conversations, all those times Dad would suddenly change his mind about something after talking to you?" I pressed my back against the kitchen counter, my heart hammering. This wasn't the Marcus I knew, competitive and condescending, yes, but never threatening. Never dangerous. You want to know what I think really happened? He continued, moving closer. I think Dad was getting senile. I think you took advantage of an old man who wasn't thinking clearly anymore. Dad wasn't senile, I said firmly. He was sharp right up until the end. Was he? Because the Dad I knew would never have given a construction company to someone who's never even held a hammer. The accusation stung, because it was so fundamentally wrong. I'd been holding hammers since I was old enough to walk, had learned to read blueprints before I learned to read chapter books, had spent countless hours in Dad's workshop learning the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver. But Marcus had never paid attention to any of that. To him, I was just the little sister who played with dolls. I know more about construction than you think, I said quietly. Really? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Prove it. Tell me about the Morrison project. The timeline, the budget, the subcontractors we're using. I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it. He was right, I didn't know those details. Dad had kept me involved in the strategic side of the business, but the day-to-day operations were Marcus's domain. That's what I thought, he said, satisfaction creeping into his voice. You don't know anything about actually running this company. You're going to destroy everything Dad built. Then help me, I said, surprising myself with the words. You know the operational side, I know the strategic side. We could work together. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe even hope. But then his expression hardened again. Work for you mean? Take orders from my little sister who thinks she knows better than everyone else. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is. He was close enough now that I could see the red in his eyes, smell the whiskey on his breath. You've always thought you were smarter than me. Dad's special little girl who could do no wrong. Marcus, that's not true. Isn't it? He slammed his hand against the counter beside me, making me jump. You know what the worst part is? I actually believed Dad when he said the business would be mine someday. I turned down other opportunities, other jobs, because I thought I was building something for my future. For my family. The pain in his voice was real, and for a moment I felt a stab of sympathy for him. But then I remembered the way he dismissed my work, the way he'd always made me feel small and insignificant. I never asked for this, I said. I didn't know Dad was planning any of it. But you're not going to give it back, are you? The question hung between us like a challenge. And as I looked at my brother, really looked at him, I realized that this moment was going to define our relationship for the rest of our lives. No, I said quietly. I'm not. Something shifted in his expression, something cold and final. Then we have nothing more to talk about. He turned and walked toward the front door, but paused with his hand on the knob. You know what's going to happen, don't you? He said without turning around. The crew won't respect you. The clients won't trust you. And when the business starts falling apart, and it will, everyone's going to know it's because Dad made a mistake. Maybe, I said, finding my voice again. Or maybe they'll see that Dad knew exactly what he was doing. Marcus finally turned to look at me, and what I saw in his eyes made my blood run cold. We'll see about that. After he left, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the rain against the windows and trying to process what had just happened. My brother, the person who was supposed to protect me, support me, love me unconditionally, had just declared war. And as I finally locked the front door and turned off the lights, I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus's parting words weren't just a prediction. They were a threat. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at Dad's kitchen table with a manila folder spread before me, reading every document, every contract, every piece of correspondence until I understood the full scope of what I'd inherited. By dawn, I had a clearer picture of Wirt's construction than Marcus probably did, despite his 8 years of day-to-day involvement. The company was more than successful. It was positioned for explosive growth. Dad had been quietly building relationships with major developers, architects, and city planners throughout the region. The residential development project I'd found was just the beginning. There were preliminary discussions for a historic district renovation, a green housing initiative, and a partnership with the State University for student housing. But all of these opportunities required someone who could think strategically, who could see the bigger picture. Someone who understood that construction wasn't just about building structures, it was about creating communities. At 7:30, I drove to the Wirtz construction office, a converted warehouse on the industrial side of town that Dad had bought and renovated 15 years ago. I'd been here countless times as a child, but walking through the front door as the owner felt surreal. The receptionist, Mrs. Chun, looked up in surprise. "Emily, I wasn't expecting you today. I'm so sorry for your loss, honey. Your father was a wonderful man." "Thank you, Mrs. Chun. Is Marcus here yet?" "He's in the conference room with the foreman. They've been here since 7, going over the weekly schedule." I could hear voices through the conference room door. Marcus's voice, specifically, holding court with the authority of someone who believed he was in charge. I took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in," Marcus called. I opened the door to find 5 men around a table covered with blueprints and project schedules. Marcus sat at the head of the table in Dad's chair, and the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The conversation stopped abruptly when they saw me. "Emily," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. "I wasn't sure you'd show up." "We had an appointment," I replied, stepping into the room. "Good morning, everyone." The foreman, Joe, Rick, Danny, Carlos, and Tom all murmured greetings, but I could see the confusion in their eyes. They knew something had happened at the will reading, but they didn't know what. "Well," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, "I guess this is as good a time as any to break the news. It turns out there's been a change in ownership." The way he said it made it sound like a hostile takeover rather than Dad's carefully planned succession. "What kind of change?" Joe asked. He was the senior foreman, had worked with Dad for over 20 years. Marcus gestured toward me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Emily here is apparently the new owner of Wirtz Construction." Surprise. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the men processing this information, trying to make sense of it. To them, I was Robert Wirtz's daughter, who worked with dolls, not someone who knew anything about construction. "I know this is unexpected," I said, finding my voice. "And I know you probably have questions about what this means for the company, for your jobs, for the projects we have in progress." "Do you?" Rick asked bluntly. He was younger than Joe, more direct. "Know what it means, I mean. Because no offense, but we've never seen you on a job site." "That's because I've been working on the business side of things," I said, which was true, even if I hadn't realized it at the time. Dad and I spent a lot of time discussing strategy, planning for the future, identifying new opportunities. Marcus snorted. "Strategy. Right." I ignored him and pulled out one of the documents from Dad's folder. "For instance, we have a preliminary agreement with Riverside Development for a 200-home project. The contract is worth $12 million over 3 years. The room went quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Joe leaned forward. $12 million? Bob never mentioned anything about that. Because it wasn't finalized yet, I explained. Dad was still negotiating the terms. But according to his notes, Riverside specifically requested Wirtz Construction because of our reputation for quality residential work and our commitment to sustainable building practices. I saw Carlos and Tom exchange glances. They'd been the ones pushing for more green building techniques, and Dad had listened to them. "What about the Morrison project?" Marcus asked, his voice sharp. "The timeline, the budget, the subcontractors. Since you know so much about the business side." It was the same test he'd given me the night before, and he was right. I didn't know those operational details. But I'd learned something important from Dad's documents. "The Morrison project is a perfect example of why we need to think bigger," I said. "It's a beautiful custom home, and the clients are happy, but it's also a one-off project that doesn't leverage our full capabilities. According to Dad's analysis, we make more profit on smaller residential developments where we can use standardized processes and bulk purchasing." Joe nodded slowly. "Bob did mention something about that. Said we were leaving money on the table with too many custom jobs." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Custom jobs are what built this company's reputation. And they'll always be part of what we do," I agreed. "But they shouldn't be the only thing we do." Dad saw opportunities for growth that we haven't explored yet. I pulled out another document, the correspondence with the historic district renovation project. The city is looking for a contractor to restore the Victorian homes on Elm Street. It's a 3-year project, worth $8 million, and it would establish us as the premier historic renovation company in the region. Historic renovation? Danny asked, interest creeping into his voice. I've always wanted to work on those old houses. The techniques are different from new construction, I continued, but we have the skills. And more importantly, we have something most contractors don't, an understanding of how to preserve the character of a building while updating it for modern living. I was thinking of my doll restoration work as I said it, the way I had to balance historical accuracy with practical functionality. But I could see from their expressions that the foremen were thinking about their own experiences with renovation projects. That's all very interesting, Marcus interrupted, but talk is cheap. Do you actually know how to run a construction crew? How to read blueprints? How to manage a budget? I know how to read blueprints, I said quietly. Dad taught me when I was 12. Knowing how to read them and knowing how to execute them are two different things. He was right, and we both knew it. But before I could respond, Joe spoke up. Marcus, with all due respect, your dad didn't make decisions lightly. If he left the company to Emily, he had his reasons. His reasons were sentimental, Marcus snapped. Emily was always his favorite. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I could see the discomfort on the foremen's faces. This was family drama they didn't want to be part of. You know what? I said, standing up. You're right, Marcus. I don't know how to manage a construction crew day to day. I don't know all the operational details. But I do know this business, and I know what Dad wanted for its future. I gathered up the documents and looked around the table. I'm not here to fire anyone or make dramatic changes. I'm here to honor Dad's vision and build on what he started. But I can't do that if we're going to spend every meeting relitigating the will. Marcus leaned forward. So, what are you proposing? I'm proposing that we work together. You handle operations, I handle strategy and business development. We play to our strengths. And who makes the final decisions? The question was a trap, and we both knew it. If I said I did, I'd look like a power-hungry usurper. If I said we'd decide together, Marcus would interpret it as weakness. I do, I said simply, because that's what Dad wanted, and it's what the law says. But I'm not interested in being a dictator. I want your input, your expertise, your experience. I want all of your input, I added, looking around the table at the foreman. Joe cleared his throat. What about the current projects? The Morrison House, the Riverside subdivision, the commercial renovation downtown? Nothing changes in the short term, I said. Marcus knows those projects inside and out, and I trust his judgment on the operational side. But going forward, I want us to think bigger. I want us to pursue the opportunities Dad was developing. And if I don't want to work for you? Marcus asked. The question was loaded with challenge, but also with something else, uncertainty. For the first time since the will reading, I saw a crack in his armor. Then you don't have to, I said. You're a good foreman, Marcus. You could get a job with any construction company in the state. But this is our family's business, and I'd rather keep it in the family. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his options. Pride versus practicality. Anger versus opportunity. Fine, he said finally. We'll try it your way. But when it doesn't work, and it won't, I want it on record that I warned you. Noted, I said. The meeting broke up after that, with the foremen heading out to their various job sites and Marcus disappearing into his office without another word. I was gathering up my papers when Joe approached me. Emily, he said quietly, can I give you some advice? Please. Your brother's not wrong about the challenges you're going to face. The crew respects Marcus because he's been in the trenches with them. The clients trust him because he knows how to talk their language. You're going to have to prove yourself in ways he never did. I know. But, he continued, your dad was the smartest businessman I ever worked for. If he thought you could do this, then maybe you can. Just be patient with Marcus. This isn't easy for him. I nodded, though privately I wondered if patience was going to be enough. Marcus had made it clear that he saw this as a zero-sum game. Either he won or I won, but we couldn't both succeed. I spent the rest of the morning in Dad's office, going through files and trying to understand the current state of every project. The Morrison house was on schedule and under budget. The Riverside subdivision was in the planning phase, waiting for final permits. The commercial renovation was behind schedule due to unexpected structural issues, but nothing that couldn't be resolved. It was all manageable, all within the scope of what the company had been doing for years. But as I read through Dad's notes and correspondence, I could see his vision for something bigger. He hadn't just been running a construction company, he'd been building a legacy. Around noon, Mrs. Chin knocked on my door. "Emily, there's someone here to see you. Says it's about the Riverside project." I looked up to see a woman in an expensive suit standing in the doorway. She was probably in her 50s, with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from years of making important decisions. "Ms. Wirtz? I'm Catherine Riverside, from Riverside Development. I was hoping we could talk." My stomach dropped. This was the client for the $12 million project, and I had no idea why she was here or what she wanted to discuss. "Of course," I said, standing up. "Please come in." She settled into the chair across from Dad's desk and studied me with sharp blue eyes. "I was sorry to hear about your father's passing. He was a good man and an excellent contractor." "Thank you. I understand there's been a change in ownership?"
Yes.
"I've inherited the company." She nodded slowly. "And you are?" "I'm Robert's daughter. I've been working with him on the business development side of things." It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Catherine Riverside struck me as someone who would see through any attempt at deception. "I see. Well, I'll be direct, Ms. Wirtz. The Riverside project is important to us. It's our entry into this market, and we need a contractor who can deliver on time, on budget, and with the quality we've come to expect from Wirtz Construction." "I understand."
Do you?
"Because I've heard rumors that there might be some instability in your organization. Family disputes, questions about leadership, that sort of thing." My blood ran cold. How had she heard about the will reading? About the tension between Marcus and me? "I can assure you that Wirtz Construction is committed to the Riverside project," I said carefully. "We have the experience, the resources, and the team to deliver exactly what you're looking for." "I hope so. Because if there's any doubt about your ability to complete this project, we'll need to explore other options. We have a timeline to meet and investors to satisfy." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "I'll be in touch, Ms. Wirtz. I hope we can move forward together, but I need to see some evidence that you're capable of managing a project of this scope." After she left, I sat in Dad's chair feeling like the walls were closing in. Somehow, word of our family drama had already reached our biggest potential client. If we lost the Riverside project, it would be a devastating blow to the company's future. I was still processing this when Marcus appeared in my doorway. "Heard you had a visitor," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Catherine Riverside. She's concerned about the leadership transition." "Is she?" Marcus's smile was cold. "That's unfortunate. I hope you were able to reassure her." Something in his tone made my skin crawl. "Marcus, did I what? Talk to our clients about the situation? Explain that there might be some growing pains as you learn the business?" I might have mentioned it to a few people. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. "You're sabotaging the company." "I'm being realistic about the challenges we're facing. If clients are going to find out anyway, isn't it better that they hear it from someone they trust?" "Someone they trust to do what? Undermine the new owner?" Marcus stepped into the office and closed the door behind him. "Emily, you're in over your head. You know it, I know it, and now our clients know it. The best thing you can do is step aside before you destroy everything Dad built." "I'm not stepping aside." "Then you're going to fail. And when you do, I'll be here to pick up the pieces." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Emily, you might want to check the Morrison project. I think you'll find it educational." After he left, I sat there for a moment trying to process what had just happened. Then I grabbed my keys and drove to the Morrison job site. The house was beautiful, a custom colonial on 3 acres of wooded land. But as I walked around the property, I could see problems that hadn't been mentioned in the project files. The foundation work looked uneven. The framing seemed off somehow. And when I looked closer at the electrical work, I could see code violations that would never pass inspection. My phone rang.
It was Joe.
Emily, we need to talk. Can you meet me at the office? I'm at the Morrison site. Joe, there are problems here. Serious problems. I know. That's what I need to talk to you about. 20 minutes later, I was back in the conference room with Joe, and his expression was grim. How bad is it? I asked. Bad. The foundation is off by 6 inches on the north side. The electrical work doesn't meet code. And the plumbing, let's just say it's going to need to be completely redone. How did this happen? Marcus said the project was on schedule and under budget. Joe looked uncomfortable. It is under budget. That's part of the problem. Marcus has been cutting corners, using cheaper materials, rushing the work. He's been telling the clients that everything is fine, but it's not.
No.
And if the city inspector sees this, we'll be shut down. Our license could be revoked. I felt sick. How long has this been going on? A few months, maybe longer. I tried to talk to Marcus about it, but he said the budget was tight and we needed to make the numbers work. And Dad? Did he know? Joe shook his head. Bob was focused on the big picture stuff. He trusted Marcus to handle the day-to-day operations. I sat back in my chair, trying to process this. Marcus hadn't just been undermining me. He'd been undermining the entire company. And now I was the one who would have to deal with the consequences. What do we do? I asked. We fix it. All of it. It's going to cost money we don't have and time we can't spare, but it's the only way to save the company's reputation. And Marcus? Joe's expression hardened. That's up to you. But Emily, if this gets out, if the clients find out we've been cutting corners, it won't matter who owns the company. There won't be a company left to own. I thought about Catherine Riverside's warning, about Marcus's smug confidence, about Dad's vision for the future. Everything was falling apart, and I had to find a way to hold it together. Joe, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I need you to do something for me. I need a full assessment of every active project. Every single one. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. He nodded grimly. It's going to take a few days, but I'll get the other foreman involved. We'll check everything, foundations, framing, electrical, plumbing, the works. And Joe? Keep this between us for now. I don't want Marcus to know what we're doing until we have the full picture. After Joe left, I sat alone in the conference room, staring at the blueprints scattered across the table. Each one represented someone's dream, a family home, a new beginning, a place to build memories. And Marcus had been treating them like line items on a budget spreadsheet. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard about your inheritance. Congratulations. We should talk. David Chun and Associates Architecture. I stared at the message, trying to place the name. Then I remembered. David Chun was Mrs. Chen's son, and according to Dad's files, one of the architects he'd been hoping to partner with on the historic district project. I called the number. David? This is Emily Wirtz. You sent me a text. Emily, yes. I was sorry to hear about your father. He was a good man and a visionary contractor. Thank you. I'll be direct. I've heard there might be some changes at Wirtz Construction.
Some instability.
I wanted to reach out because your father and I were discussing a significant project, and I'd hate to see that opportunity disappear. Another client who'd heard about our problems. I was starting to see a pattern. What kind of project? The Elm Street Historic District renovation. The City Council approved it last week, and they're accepting bids next month. Your father was very interested, and frankly, Wirtz Construction was my first choice for a partner. Well, that depends. Are you planning to continue your father's vision, or are you going to let family politics destroy what he built? The bluntness of the question caught me off guard. I'm committed to continuing Dad's work.
Good.
Because I have a proposition for you. Meet me tomorrow morning at the Elm Street site, 7 a.m. I want to show you something that might change how you think about this business. After he hung up, I sat there wondering what I was getting myself into. But one thing was becoming clear. If I was going to save this company, I couldn't do it by playing defense. I needed to go on the offense. That evening, I drove back to Dad's house and went straight to the basement workshop. The dollhouse sat exactly where I'd left it, Dad's vision of possibility rendered in perfect miniature. But now I saw something I'd missed before. Hidden in the tiny workshop addition was a small figure, a woman with dark hair, bent over a workbench. Dad had carved her with the same meticulous attention to detail he'd given everything else, and she was clearly meant to be me. But she wasn't working on a doll. She was holding what looked like a tiny blueprint. I picked up the figure and examined it more closely. There, etched into the base in letters so small I needed a magnifying glass to read them, was a single word: builder. The next morning, I met David Chun at the Elm Street Historic District. The area was a collection of Victorian homes built in the 1890s, most of them in various states of disrepair. Paint peeled from ornate trim work, porches sagged under the weight of a century, and several houses had broken windows covered with plywood. But underneath the neglect, I could see the bones of something magnificent. "Beautiful, aren't they?" David said, joining me on the sidewalk. He was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 30s, with an easy smile and the kind of enthusiasm that was infectious. "They're incredible. The craftsmanship, the attention to detail. Exactly what your father said when I brought him here. He understood that these houses aren't just buildings, they're pieces of history. They tell the story of the city, of the families who lived here, of the dreams they built." We walked down the street, David pointing out architectural details and explaining his vision for the renovation. It wasn't just about restoring the houses to their original condition. It was about adapting them for modern living while preserving their historic character. "The city wants to turn this into a showcase district," he explained. "Tourist destination, high-end residential, maybe some boutique shops and restaurants. But they want it done right. No cutting corners, no cheap materials, no shortcuts." "What's the timeline?" 3 years for the full project. We'd start with the most structurally sound houses and work our way through the district. The city is providing grants and tax incentives, plus there are federal historic preservation funds available. And the budget? $12 million for the full project. But Emily, this isn't just about the money. This is about establishing Wirtz Construction as the premier historic renovation company in the region. Your father understood that. We stopped in front of a particularly beautiful Queen and Victorian, its turret and gingerbread trim still intact despite years of neglect. "This was going to be our test case," David said. "Your father wanted to restore this house as a demonstration of what we could accomplish. Show the City Council, the Preservation Society, the potential investors what was possible." I stared up at the house, imagining it restored to its former glory. It would be like my doll restoration work, but on a massive scale, taking something broken and forgotten and bringing it back to life. "David, can I ask you something? How did you hear about the problems at Wirtz Construction?" His expression darkened. "Your brother called me yesterday. Said there might be delays in the project due to leadership changes. Suggested I might want to consider other contractors." The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. Marcus wasn't just undermining me with existing clients. He was sabotaging future opportunities. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd wait to hear from you directly. Your father spoke about you often, Emily. He said you had an eye for detail and an understanding of craftsmanship that most contractors lack." "He said that. He said you saw buildings the way he did, not just as structures but as homes, as places where people create their lives." We spent another hour walking through the district, David explaining his vision, and me asking questions about structural challenges, building codes, and preservation requirements. By the time we finished, I had a clear picture of what the project would entail. It was ambitious, complex, and exactly the kind of work that would establish Wirtz Construction as more than just another contractor. "So," David said as we stood beside our cars, "are you interested?" "Very. But I need to be honest with you, we're dealing with some internal challenges right now. I can't guarantee that the transition will be smooth." I appreciate the honesty. But Emily, opportunities like this don't come along often. The City Council is meeting next week to finalize the contractor selection process. If Wirtz Construction wants to be considered, we need to submit our proposal by Friday. That's 4 days. I know. Your father and I had already done most of the preliminary work, but we'll need to update everything to reflect the new ownership structure. I thought about the Morrison project, about the corners Marcus had been cutting, about the reputation he'd been destroying. Then I thought about Dad's vision, about the dollhouse in his workshop, about the tiny figure labeled builder. "Let's do it," I said. That afternoon, I called a meeting with all the foremen. When Marcus walked into the conference room and saw David Chin sitting at the table, his face went white. "What's he doing here?" Marcus demanded. "David is here to discuss the Elm Street project," I said calmly. "We're submitting a proposal to the city. We don't have time for new projects. We're already stretched thin with current commitments." "Actually, we do have time, especially once we finish fixing the problems with the Morrison house." The room went dead silent. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "What problems?" Joe cleared his throat. "Marcus, we need to talk about the quality issues we've been seeing. The foundation work, the electrical, There are no quality issues," Marcus interrupted. "The Morrison project is on schedule and under budget." "Under budget because you've been cutting corners," I said quietly. "Using substandard materials, rushing the work, ignoring code requirements." Marcus stood up, so fast his chair fell over. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" I pulled out the photos I'd taken at the Morrison site. 6-inch foundation variants. Electrical work that won't pass inspection. Plumbing that violates 3 different building codes. The foreman studied the photos, their expressions growing more grim with each image. "Jesus, Marcus," Danny muttered. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking about keeping this company profitable," Marcus snapped. "Do you have any idea how tight the margins are? How much pressure we're under to deliver projects on time and under budget?" "Not at the expense of quality," Joe said firmly. "Never at the expense of quality." Marcus looked around the table, seeing the disapproval on every face.
Fine.
"So we fix a few minor issues. It's not the end of the world." "It's not minor," I said. "And it's not just the Morrison project. Joe's doing a full assessment of all our active projects." "You what?" Marcus turned on Joe. "You went behind my back?" "I went to the owner," Joe replied calmly. "Which is Emily." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Marcus stared at me with something approaching hatred. "You think you're so smart," he said. "You think you can just waltz in here and fix everything with your little dollhouse expertise. But you have no idea what it takes to run a real business." "Maybe not," I admitted. "But I know what it takes to restore something broken. And that's what we're going to do. Restore this company to what Dad intended it to be." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Good luck with that. Because when this all falls apart, and it will, I won't be here to clean up your mess." He headed for the door, then turned back one last time. "You want to know the truth, Emily? Dad didn't leave you this company because he thought you could run it. He left it to you because he felt guilty about always choosing you over me. This is his way of apologizing for a lifetime of favoritism." "That's not true," I said, but my voice sounded small even to my own ears. "Isn't it? Think about it. Every school play, every science fair, every little achievement. Who did Dad brag about? Who did he spend his weekends with? Who was his precious little girl who could do no wrong?" The accusations stung because there was truth in them. Dad and I had been close, closer than he and Marcus had ever been. But it wasn't favoritism, it was connection, understanding, shared interests. "Even if that were true," I said, finding my strength again, "it doesn't change the fact that he trusted me with his life's work. And I'm not going to let you destroy it out of spite." Marcus stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. "You know what?
You're right. This is your company now.
Your responsibility. Your problem." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and tossed it on the table. "My resignation. Effective immediately." "Marcus, wait." But he was already gone, leaving behind only the echo of the slamming door and the stunned silence of the men around the table. David Chun was the first to speak. "Well," he said quietly, "I guess that settles the question of leadership." I picked up Marcus's resignation letter with shaking hands. 2 weeks ago, I'd been Emily Wirtz, doll restoration specialist. Now I was Emily Wirtz, owner and operator of a construction company in crisis, with a brother who hated me and a reputation to rebuild. So, Joe said, breaking the silence, what do we do now? I looked around the table at these men who had worked with my father for years, who had trusted his judgment enough to stay when everything fell apart. They were looking at me with a mixture of uncertainty and hope, waiting to see if I would rise to the challenge or crumble under the pressure. I thought about the dollhouse in Dad's workshop, about the tiny figure labeled Builder, about his vision of what our family legacy could become. Now, I said, my voice stronger than I felt, we get to work. We fix the Morrison project. We submit the Elm Street proposal. And we prove that Wirtz Construction is still a company worth trusting. David smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. But first, I continued, I need to ask you all something. Marcus was right about one thing. I don't know how to manage a construction crew day to day. I don't know all the operational details. I'm going to need help, guidance, patience while I learn. You'll have it, Joe said without hesitation. Your father was a good man and a smart businessman. If he thought you could do this, that's good enough for me. The others nodded in agreement, and for the first time since the will reading, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could actually pull this off. All right then, I said, standing up. Let's build something. 3 months later, I stood in front of the restored Queen and Victorian on Elm Street, watching as the last of the scaffolding was removed from the turret. The house gleamed in the afternoon sun, its gingerbread trim painted in historically accurate colors, its windows sparkling with new glass that matched the original specifications. It had been the hardest 3 months of my life. We'd had to completely redo the Morrison project, eating the cost overruns and working overtime to meet the deadline. I'd had to learn everything from reading construction schedules to managing subcontractors to dealing with building inspectors. But we'd done it. The Morrison family had their dream house, built to the highest standards. The city council had awarded us the Elm Street contract. And Wirtz Construction's reputation was not only restored but enhanced. Marcus had taken a job with a commercial contractor in the next county. We hadn't spoken since the day he resigned, though I'd heard through Mrs. Chun that he was doing well. I missed him, missed the brother he'd been before jealousy and resentment poisoned our relationship, but I didn't regret the path I'd chosen. Beautiful work, David said, joining me on the sidewalk. Your father would be proud. I hope so. I know so. Emily, I've worked with a lot of contractors over the years, and most of them see buildings as products to be manufactured as quickly and cheaply as possible. But you see them the way your father did, as homes, as pieces of history, as works of art. I smiled, thinking about the dollhouse in Dad's workshop, about the hours I'd spent learning to restore broken things and make them beautiful again. It's all the same work, really, I said. Whether it's a Victorian mansion or a porcelain doll, you're taking something that's been damaged by time and neglect and bringing it back to life. You're honoring the craftsmanship of the people who came before you while adapting it for the people who come after. That's exactly what your father used to say. As we stood there watching the sun set behind the restored house, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since Dad's death. This was what he'd wanted, not just for me to inherit his business, but for me to understand that building wasn't just about construction. It was about creating spaces where people could build their lives, their families, their dreams. It was about taking broken things and making them whole again. It was about being a builder, in every sense of the word. My phone buzzed with a text from Joe. New client wants to meet tomorrow. Historic farmhouse restoration. Interested? I smiled and typed back. Absolutely. Let's build something beautiful. Because that's what builders do. We take the broken pieces of the world and put them back together, one project at a time, one dream at a time. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to build something that lasts long after we're gone, a legacy that honors the past while creating possibilities for the future. Just like Dad had always planned.